And for fans of the Human Lab podcast, and if you're not a fan, what are you doing with your life? You would probably chuckle at the fact that Andrew just cited his sources even on that statement. Because you're so good at, I don't know how your memory works, but the only person whose memory is better than Joe Rogan is yours.
But my colleagues joke, PubMed sort of scrolls through my mind. Also in science, as you know, attribution is so baked into what we do. And I think that it's interesting because now spending a lot of time on social media, attribution is not as common. And but in academia, you learn really early on that if you give a talk about your data and you cite all these amazing sources, all it does is make you look better, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in social media and elsewhere in the business sector, it's almost like citing other people. People feel as if it's going to take away some of the credit. All it does is place you in the company of people that do really nice work. So I have genuine and tremendous respect for Tim. He's been about 10 years ahead on a huge number of health-related things and other things. An extremely kind person, very thoughtful person. So it's also just a pleasure to shine light on other people. Right?
Yeah. Well, I actually, to push back, I know there's a culture of if you write a paper, standing on the shoulders of giants is a powerful thing. But there's also a culture of not giving credit to the strongest idea in your paper and instead say it's kind of, or imply that it's original. There is a culture of kind of not celebrating others. I think people get most competitive in all walks of life, but especially in science when the closer they get in exactly the thing they work on. And so there's this dance, there's a few researchers.
Folks, Uberman is right. And in the age of social media, people have forgotten this very basic fact. People copy and paste and rarely give attribution and often take credit for things that is not theirs. It wasn't always like this, of course. And some of you already know that Dr. Koch Brave and myself helped develop and kind of evolve and kick in this bioceramic revolution, having developed these bioceramic sealers and so on. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a backdrop and talk to someone I know and respect a lot today that had a lot of impact on the practice of endodontics and how we practice it clinically. And no, I'm not just talking about someone who's done a ton of scientific studies in endo and has a bunch of articles published and so on, but someone who is actually innovated and have done creative thinking and has combined entrepreneurship and education at the podium while innovating in the background. Today, I'm going to take you with me along for a visit to Dr. Ann Koch, who started and founded Real World Endo in the late 1990s, along with her partner, Dennis Braves, and were president and CEO of Real World Endo back then. And in 2012, they both retired. And today what I'm going to do is sit down with Dr. Koch, do a little review of all this stuff from the beginning when she was my program director at Harvard Endo, and then what happened afterwards. She does happen to have a summer house in Cape Cod. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you guys along with me so we can go visit her and talk a little bit about the beginnings of Real World Endo, how it came about, and many of the innovations in endodontics. All right, let's go. It was traffic.
Welcome to Chatham.
Absolutely, thank you. Beautiful house.
Yeah, glad you made it.
Yeah. Forward to this out. I was like,
Yeah.
Good conversation.
It is an interesting house. There we go.
Annie, thank you so much for having me here visit you in your beautiful historic house here in Chatham. And, as I told you, I was kind of inspired to come and visit you because I wanted to discuss this issue of credit, which is so important in science, and recently it's kind of in the age of social media has been kind of lost.
It's been crazy.
Exactly. And, so, you've made a lot of contributions to the field of endodontics and, started by being my program director at Harvard many years ago and so on. I just wanted to kind of have you go over the history to share with our audience, especially younger audience who haven't really been a part of this history of endodontics and evolution of all of this technology that's been around, and talk a little bit about Real World Endo's origins and how did it come about, and the contributions that has been made. So I'd love to hear you start right from the outset here.
Absolutely. And I've been doing this stuff, meaning dentistry, for more than 50 years, which is kind of crazy. But one of the things that you did mention, and I totally agree with you, is that all of a sudden the story gets confused. I mean, there's all kinds of different people taking credit for things that Real World Endo developed. There's salespeople taking credit for things that Real World Endo developed. So I do think it's a time where we can kind of trace chronologically how we developed Real World Endo and how Real World Endo went from a continuing education company to a technology and development company as well. And I think the whole thing really started for me was obviously when I had the good fortune and the honor of creating your postdoctoral endodontic program at Harvard. What was really interesting, as anybody who's gone to Harvard knows, there's not a lot of funding, okay? But the one thing it does, if you have some creativity, they allow you to run with the ball. And I think one of the things that you and I have seen is that we've seen a lot of the things that we were doing now become standard. For instance, when you guys started that first year, we were the first postdoctoral endodontic program in North America using rotary files full time. The first rotary file was actually the Lightspeed down at UT San Antonio, but they were using it kind of as an apical verifiers. But when you guys came on the scene, we went right to the full shank rotary file, which at that time was the profile. And you probably don't remember this, or maybe you do, but I said to you guys, listen, we're going to a new technology that I know very little about and you guys know nothing about. So we had two options. One was that if we didn't share impressions or challenges, we would all sink. The other choice was if we shared it, it would be, and I hate to use this term, but it's true here, it would be synergistic. And I think it was terrific because very quickly we understood how we could get predictable shapes with a constant taper. Very quickly we understood that canals that come together are very challenging for rotary files. So I think that was the first big thing that we were doing, was that we were leading the way at Harvard in terms of what we were doing with rotary files. The second thing I think that was really interesting was that very quickly I saw endodontics. When I went back to my postdoctoral endo training at Penn, I had been doing restorative dentistry and mainly pros for 14 years. I was the oldest resident in the school. But one of the things that I really was totally fully set upon was that endodontics was not a separate entity. And people talk about endodontics here, pros and restorative over there. But if you're doing a post, you are in the exact same space as the person who did the root canal. So from day one with your program, and I think you probably agree now looking back at it, we associated endo with the prosthodontic endpoint and the restoration of the tooth. So the thing was in the beginning, and I remember there was a whole thing in Boston about getting the look. And we were doing canal preparations much more conservative because all the people who were doing the look never did a crown in their life. I was chief of pros at 3 different Air Force bases, and I ran the lab for all of the Pacific. So I understand shim stock paper, and I understand occlusion. So I think that linking of doing the root canal with the restoration of the tooth and reestablishing the occlusion is a big deal. And we were actually using the term when you were a resident about endodontic synchronicity, where everything matches, meaning you create a shape, the gutta percha matches, and we also talked about an endo-restorative continuum. I have to laugh now because now I see companies that see all kinds of things about restorative endodontics. They got it wrong. They were getting warm, but they got it wrong. It's an endo-restorative continuum, meaning your endodontics leads right into the restoration of the tooth. So I think what we were doing there really set the ground in terms of how we were shaping. Also, I never bought the whole thing about sealers when I was a postdoctoral endo student. I thought they were making sealers to build in failure so they could retreat it. I couldn't understand, why don't we go for the best seal possible, and if it fails, then we can retreat it, or at worst, we can do some apical surgery. But there were too many programs at the time, Al, that didn't do any kind of apical surgery. And one of the things with our program, we had you guys doing apical surgery very early. Program starts in July. You guys were doing surgeries in October. That whole thing about sealers came from George Stewart, who, if you remember, was our first guest lecturer. Dr. Stewart was an amazing man, and he was an incredible gentleman. But he really got me involved with glass ionomer. So one of the things that you people were doing, and I was doing in the faculty practice at the time, I was, for want of a better term, playing around with glass ionomer. And I was finding out that I was getting better seals than with conventional sealers. It could be retreated. And even in certain cases that had a fracture, if the case hadn't gone necrotic and didn't probe, I could do a single cone with glass ionomer, fill up the chamber with glass ionomer, and it worked. And I had 3, 4, 5 year post-ops on it. So I think what was really significant about our program, we had the first microscope in Boston. That was a GenMed from the GenMed company. They were very generous. Everybody looked at us like we were crazy. How come endodontists need microscopes? Obviously, the general and some of the hospitals had microscopes up in the ceiling, big Leica units for some kind of surgery. But we were the first endodontic component that had a microscope. So we had shaping using rotary files. I remember having apex locators. You had a couple of faculty members that was screaming about, all this newfangled stuff that doesn't work. What you don't know is they sheepishly came back to me when you weren't watching and asked me if I could get a discount on a J Merita Root CX. That's very typical. So I think my creativity was really a result of having residents like you guys who were stimulating nonstop 24/7 and having a school that was very, very willing to let me do things. And for that, I'm always and forever thankful about Harvard. But I think we made a big difference in how we were running our program.
Yeah. Can I just add a little perspective here? Because the Endo program that you founded back in 1994, at the end of 1993, prior to that, there was another endodontic program that was at Forsyth, that was the Cal Krakow, with a Harvard affiliation.
Right.
But the new program that was started at Harvard, that was a Harvard basically program and not necessarily a Forsyth program. So that's what you mean by the new program.
Yes, and the title was a new program, postdoctoral endodontics and microsurgery. And we didn't have part-time people, stuff like that. Everybody was full-time. And as you know, you had to satisfy the masters from the medical school, else you couldn't get either certificate.
Right.
The Forsyth program was was a terrific program, had a Harvard component on the masters.
And the other thing also was that what you were talking about, the single cone, and what you worked on with Dr. Stewart back at the University of Pennsylvania, where you got your training, was essentially the idea of using better cements.
Yes,
and that's
totally.
at that time, glass ionomer was the only thing we had, because ZOE and the other epoxy resins that Dr. Grossman had worked with, they were like essentially they were inadequate based on his analysis. So you did the research, the definitive thing, with the idea of using glass ionomer to fill in the bigger gaps that are around one main cone that fits the cone. And that was the beginning of what then later on we refer to as hydraulic condensation, correct? That was using glass ionomer cement to fill in the gaps.
Right, and we'll talk about that with active gutta percha. But the interesting thing about the one study that I did with George Stewart and Phil Min, who was a good friend, one of my co-residents, was that when we compared lateral condensation and single cone Grossmans to the glass ionomer, we knew the glass ionomer would have a better seal than the ZOE. But what was amazing was that the single cone with Grossman's had less leakage than lateral condensation. And when we first got that result, people thought that somehow we had fudged it or screwed it up, and they don't understand my personality. And basically, because what you think about it is this. In lateral condensation, you have a master cone. You take a D11 or a D11T, and you go down 16 millimeters, and you do this. Take a fine cone, run it through some sealer, put it in that same canal, that conduit there, that goes down 13 millimeters, okay? Take a D11T, it goes down 12. Take a cone, it goes down 10.
Right.
So when you do this, what you realize is that lateral condensation is by definition a series of cones in a sea of cement with a whole bunch of voids.
Right.
Does it work? Absolutely it works, and it was a gold standard for many years. But my whole thing was, wait, there's a story here that's not being told. Right. And so for me, and the other thing was, and I knew this from Pros, and you guys understood it from day one, what creates the seal in a root canal is the sealer.
Right. And one thing also that I've noticed that most people don't realize is all of the condensation techniques that require excessive condensation, whether it's lateral or vertical, during the compaction you get a better seal. The problem with what people don't realize is during the release that it creates a negative pressure and that pulls back, and that actually what creates the void. And so that is the reason why
kind of less compaction in terms of big forces would be more helpful in terms of reducing the amount of voids in them.
And most people didn't know Dr. Schilder personally. I knew her personally, and obviously he was one of the giants in our field. He was fastidious about condensing, and he took a lot of x-rays per canal because he was very concerned about the shrinkage. His original technique has been, let's say, a nice term, modified through the years. So now you have a lot of, the shrinkage is probably 7 to 8% in warm vertical condensation.
Yeah, these are part of the issues that are usually not addressed when we talk about, we use the term vertical condensation as a panacea, as though it's all the same as what Dr. Schilder described.
Yes.
So then I do remember that you were my program director at the school back in '94 on, and then why did you left Harvard?
Well, I had a great opportunity from Dentsply, and they're obviously a large, terrific company, to go out and replace Ben Johnson, who was the founder. I didn't quite even know what the job description was. Well, it was replacing him in terms of interaction with endodontists and the dental community. So I went out, I was a director, and I created this whole education program. I also changed the way we were doing courses, because instead of trying to find somebody like, hey Al, do you know somebody who can talk about perio and they're cheap? What I realized, every meeting was looking for speakers. Why don't we supply the speaker? That was a real sea change in dental continuing education. So actually, I have no problem with my Dentsply experience. That became my MBA.
Right.
1 year we did more than 320 courses. I went around everything. I went with salespeople. I went around, I learned the whole patent process. I learned the whole way of how do you do prototypes. Most dentists and physicians, when they have a product idea, have no idea how to develop prototypes. So it was a really worthwhile 3 years for me, but at that point in time, it was appropriate for everybody to go their own separate directions. So at that point, I had been thinking about and had been doing some Real World Endo things. And then I created Real World Endo, and when I was first doing Real World Endo, most people don't know this, I was doing it on cruises out of Vancouver, Canada. I can't make that up. But I was doing the Alaska cruises out of Vancouver, Canada, and that was the start to Real World Endo. And I had advertising posters, little ads that looked like, the Titanic star line, if you ever seen those. And that started to work really well. And as that moved and went forward, what I ended up realizing is that we got some traction here. There was interest by a company out on the West Coast called Cybro, and they're a big endodontic company as well as a big orthodontic company. So at that time, I brought in a partner, it was Dennis Brave, and I knew Dennis from Penn. And at that point, Real World Endo went from a one-man shop to kind of more like an entity, okay? Right. One of the interesting things, we spent 1 year with Cybro, and they had some terrific people, was that all of a sudden that year, we did a lot of courses, which they had never done so many before. But there were two things that really happened to us. One was that I had done a course one time over in London, and I was doing it with QED, which is a very famous endodontic distributor, quality endodontic distributors. And when I was doing the hands-on, they said to me, Dr. Koch, do you mind if we use our own gutta percha? I really don't care whose gutta percha you have, it doesn't matter. Well, when I saw that gutta percha, I realized, oh my God, this is amazing gutta percha. This is terrific stuff. It fits the constant tapers, because people were still trying to grasp the idea of constant tapers. Fitted perfectly. I asked them, who's making this for you? So they gave me the name. It happened to be a company up in Canada. So when I came back, I made a visit up to Canada. And what I wanted to do was, I realized we could get a gutta percha cone that could be validated and verified to fit the preparation. And then what I asked them to do is make it stiffer. So by changing the molecular weight, it made it a higher molecular density gutta percha, which basically means it made it stiffer, right? Yeah. So what that meant was, now we could do a preparation, just like a post-prep, and then we could have a gutta percha cone fitted. That was laser verified. Well, Real World Endo, we call that Galaxy Gutta Percha. Still maybe my favorite name, because Real World in the Galaxy. So Galaxy Gutta Percha, we were just selling, Dennis and I were selling it online to Canada, not in the States. And it was kind of amazing how much we were selling of that. And then another thing which leads into the whole thing was, I developed a product for Cybro called Smear Clear. This is a pretty simple concept. I took 17% EDTA, and I added a couple of surfactants. I added Centramid, which for those of people in academics know is very commonly used in research. It's also a potent antibacterial agent. And then I added another surfactant that's was a proprietary thing. But what we found out with Smear Clear, we could open up the dentinal tubules predictably. So now with the glass ionomer, because I'm trying to get like a monoblock, I had a chemical bond to the canal with the GIC, but now I had a chemical and mechanical bond. So at that point, that was a big deal for us, and that took up that year. After a year with Cybrone, we had an opportunity. Brasler, USA reached out to us. We went to Puerto Rico, to Dorado Beach, and we gave a couple of days lectures, and they realized that these guys are real. So we put together a relationship, and that was the start of Brasler and Real World Endo working together in terms of our intellectual property from RWE. So one of the things I think that was so interesting was that I had put together a patent on the provisional patent stage of a rotary system. And what I was doing, I was finding a way of centering the file through a design of the instrument that hadn't been used yet. So I had a provisional patent on this, and I had a different numbering system. We had a Galaxy gutta percha. And when we met with the Brasler guys, they had a grinder that they had been working with some other instruments from Switzerland, FKG, which is maybe the highest quality grinding shop on the planet. They had a design that they had been using, but nobody had any interest with it. When we looked at it, we thought, well, wait a second, this is even better than my provisional patent. So we made some modifications, very minor on that, but what we did is I put together an entire protocol of how to use that design. And that became EndoSequence. And EndoSequence, one of the things that we did, I think that's important, Ollie, was that I created an instrument called an expediter. And the expediter was a 21 millimeter size 2704 tapered instrument. What was interesting and unique about the expediter, it was like a triage file. It was a gauging instrument, because depending on how deep the expediter went, that would instruct the clinician to open up a small package of files, a medium package, or a large package, and they did a straight crown down. And that became a very, very successful, very popular system. At first it was 06s, then we brought in the 04s. And what was really interesting was when we saw the success that we were having with the EndoSequence system, I realized, wait a second, let's try to get this monoblock now with the glass ionomer. So what we decided to do, I figured, wait a second, I have a great bond to the canal wall, but I have no bond whatsoever to the gutta percha cone. And so I just figured out, like, why can't I put glass ionomer into the gutta percha cone? Well, as I found out, I could put glass ionomer up to 10% into the gutta percha cone without changing any of the physical characteristics. So what we decided to do was put it at a little bit less a percentage. So now I've got gutta percha cones that are actually a mixed combination of gutta percha and glass ionomer. Well, I thought the way I could get a better bond to the wall was if somebody could coat this gutta percha cone. As it turns out, searching through patents, there was a gentleman, a material scientist up in University of British Columbia, had some patents on coating cardiac stents. So, you know, Dennis and I went up to Vancouver, Canada, met in a Chinese restaurant, not a particularly expensive Chinese restaurant, you know, linoleum on the floor. And he was a very gracious guy. He was with his partner, Tom. And we talked about, can you coat this gutta percha cone with glass ionomer particles at a thickness less than 1 micron. I say less than 1 micron because that's nanotechnology. What was so amazing was Dr. Yang was like, sure, no problem. I mean, yeah, Kwanzaa. Absolutely no problem. And then I said, have you ever done this? He said, no, but it's no problem. And he wasn't kidding, because he did a magnificent job. But what was so amazing, and you've heard this story a gazillion times, was that at the end of this lunch, and I'm thinking like, gosh, how terrific, we're going to change obturation. He then says to me, you're using an outdated material. And I had 3 patents running through on the glass ionomer with the gutta percha. So when he said, what do you mean I'm using an outdated material? The patents haven't been fully granted. He said, everything is going towards bioceramics. He was trying to get established in orthopedic medicine, but quite honestly, he didn't have the connections. But at least Dennis and I and Real World Endo, we were a conduit.
And this, again, just to put perspective, is around 2005, 6
yeah, exactly.
time.
2005, right, yeah. So, so at this point, we said, great, let's make it
and what he was saying about things moving to bioceramics and calcium silicates, he was talking about orthopedic.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because yeah, exactly. And I knew a little bit about bioceramics because at that time, and you might remember this, the Beth Israel Hospital in Boston was growing chest walls by using bioceramics as a scaffolding agent. That's pretty fancy stuff when you're growing chest walls. So I'm not that stupid. So I said to Kwanzaa, great, let's all make a bioceramics. And he said, well, I can't get it to you with that size. Okay, how long? 3 years. So he said, it's going to take 3 years. At that point, over the wonton soup, I made a decision. Let's go with active gutta percha, because the one thing that I knew, and you know, Al, especially coming from Boston, is that we're going to take a beating from endodontic colleagues. I mean, unfortunately, endodontists sometimes get a little sensitive if they think something is a little bit too easy. This wasn't talking about necessarily something that was easy. It was talking about something that, in my opinion, was better. Okay, there's a difference. But we knew that was going to be a fist fight. So what we did is we decided to go ahead, introduce active gutta percha, which actually got some traction, and interestingly enough, especially with vets. And then when Quanzu could make the proper adjustments to the particle size, then we would introduce the BC sealer. We wrote articles, we wrote many, many articles in different magazines, everything from Dental Town to Endodontic Practice, Dentistry Today, about this whole thing. And then he beat the clock by 6 months, because 2.5 years later, he was able to deliver the Bioceramics. And of course, the only person...
in 2007.
Yeah, and we had already written the articles in 6, and of course the only clinician using this stuff was you. And
In Europe, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was amazing, because the results that you were getting, obviously you're an amazing clinician, but you also realized right from the get-go, like, this makes a lot of sense. And that was the start. And I think the other thing that people have to understand, while we were starting to run with the BC sealer, because you were the only clinician using these cases and you do a lot of surgery, you immediately recognized the opportunity for thicker, surgical perforation, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then you started doing a lot of stuff with that. So I think it's a really interesting story of how Real World Endo came, at least conceptually and then clinically. Yeah.
It's always worked together, as you said, your original concept of milling and matching that resulted into this concept of synchronicity first was going to realize with Glaciano, which is what you worked with Dr. Stewart on. Right. And then as technology kind of caught up and material science moved, the particles, smaller particle Glaciano was replaced with bioceramic particles that were nanoparticulate. And then obviously, as you said, my kind of thing with surgery and the fact that I've always used this concept of using a kind of a material that I could kind of move around led to evolving and asking for prototypes of changing the sealer to the putty that was then used for the lid technique.
Yes.
And then, at that point, it was kind of Brasser took over the material, and it was, what did we do after that?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of interesting things with this too. I mean, one of the things that's interesting when companies take over products, they're looking at margin, whoever the company is, that's their business. But one of the things is that when they change vendors, they don't realize that they don't understand how precise this is. And that was one of the things we even did with your residency program. Endodontics can be precision-based, okay? Right. And so I realized that, wait a second, the gutta percha is not matching the same way. Oh, we had changed vendors. Oh, excuse me, I think you need to tell us that, because guess what? It maybe looks the same to you, it's not, it doesn't match perfectly. So, that's the thing as developers, whether you're a dentist or a physician with companies, you have to get into this back and forth, making sure that you don't lose the tolerance. The other thing that was interesting is that as people started to understand, like, hey, these guys are onto something, the hydraulic condensation, people were starting to understand that it is about the sealer. It's not about heated gutta percha. I've never understood for a nanosecond resins. Why would anybody ever think about using a resin as a sealer? They're severely hydrophobic. The bioceramic, as you know, was unique because it's hydrophilic.
Yeah, I mean, the history goes a long way. So just, we learned that synchronicity comes from your idea of milling and matching and putting things together. And hydraulic condensation, I still remember that call when you and Dennis called me and said, we're thinking of calling this synchronous hydraulic condensation. And then it evolved into just hydraulic condensation. And hydraulic condensation was based on the fact that these are hydraulic cements and we're kind of condensing it with one cone, right? So how did it from that point on? And that was back in 2008. I do remember the call. And so then how did things evolve and move from there?
The hydraulic condensation, and it was really interesting because we actually have a video that I still show, and it's actually Dennis in the block. And what we show with that is that we show that when you have that synchronicity, you create hydraulic forces, and you also have hydrostatic forces periapically from the PDL, and it fills all those spaces. Right. And that's really a beautiful thing. And so the other thing that was interesting with the hydraulic condensation, there are people using all kinds of fancy warm vertical techniques and everything. They're kind of missing the idea. The seal is what's creating the seal. And it's the forces with the synchronicity, as a result of the synchronicity, that's driving the sealer three-dimensionally. That takes you into a whole nother discussion about ultrasonics and three-dimensional cleaning and acoustic streaming. That's another conversation. That's a whole nother day's talk. But one of the things I want to mention is that after we started using hydraulic condensation and people started to get an idea, I created during the Chicago midwinter. I woke up in the morning at 3:30. I'm then thinking like, wait, we can make a post. This is so easy. I know the shape. We can make like a custom-made prefabricated post. And that was the EndoSequence system. And it's really interesting because I wish Brasler talked about it a little bit more, because the person who loves the EndoSequence post system is a prosthodontist named Gordon Christensen. Right. He loves it because it makes so much sense. Because what you're doing is you know the shape, and again, because of the constant taper, a fine goes that deep, a medium goes that deep, a large goes that deep, extra large goes that deep. But what happens, every one of those posts fits well, and you're not weakening the tooth.
Right. So that's how the system kind of evolved. The original EndoSequence system started by the files and glass ionomer and matching cones, and then evolved into a different cement. And the meeting of the scientist, Dr. Yang, who finally resulted into this kind of a whole evolution, was a result of wanting to have the coatings on the cones, and then later on, his experience in orthopedics transferred into endodontics by bringing nanoparticulate calcium silicates to our field. Absolutely. And then the system continued with going from files and gutta percha and cement to post, and then the core and so on, and it becomes a kind of a full circle at that point. And then what happened in 2012, 2013? You'd already done so many wonderful work in endodontics, and your dentists were kind of retiring.
Yeah. We took a hiatus, and I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life hitting little white balls and yellow balls in Florida. Mm-hmm. Things didn't go quite along that same path. But also, the other thing that was interesting to me, one of the things that brought me out of retirement, was that people didn't quite understand what went into this. Sometimes my whole thing is trying to make techniques sophisticated enough, even products sophisticated enough to be simple to use. This is not about trying to impress somebody what a complicated superstar endodontist you or I are. This is about creating techniques and products that allow the greatest majority of dentists to produce stellar results. And I realized people were talking about EndoSequence. They didn't understand. Why is that a non-cutting tip? They didn't understand what are the alternating contact points do. What's the difference between doing a modified crown down versus a straight crown down? So that really brought me out of retirement. And that was interesting also, was that after a few years, I saw that some companies were trying to use heat-treated files. But to me, they were using it in the wrong way. They were using heat-treated files to help you get into the canal, to get around the access challenge. Getting into a canal, as we've often said, is not a metallurgy challenge, that's an access problem. But where heat-treated files really excel is the apical third of curved canals, especially difficult, gnarly canals. And that's what stimulated me the day when I was driving on 128 to call you up, and Ali, are you in your office? You're always in your office. I had an idea, let's take a look at it. And we sat down and we put together the blend technique. Because I think the blend technique, at the end of the day, if there's a word to describe it, it's intuitive. Right. Use the metallurgy where it's best indicated for use. Straight canal, why do you need a heat-treated instrument? Use one that cuts better, that's non-heat treated. But in those nasty short radius curvatures, I think the heat-treated files are glorious.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, as you said, it's been the evolution of the filing system. And endo is an evolving field, and it's changing constantly. And I think your contributions, not to just the field of endodontics in terms of materials and education, but also in terms of leadership and coming up with new ways of thinking outside the box and making things happen, has been great. You've obviously done a great mentorship for me over the past several decades, being my program director and later on, and it was really an honor for when you and Dennis asked me to kind of pick up the reins. The reins in 2012 to do Real World Endo, and we're still glad that you're still out there teaching.
And you know what, I think the one thing that you guys did, and this was the 5 residents that first year, understanding that it's not just endodontics. It's all the way from endo to restoring the tooth and reestablishing the occlusion. It took other people some time to understand that, but you guys, right out of school, you guys understood that immediately. Right. And I think that's one of the things that differentiates us at Real World Endo from other good continuing education companies, is that we're not just looking at the endo, we're not just looking at the look. It's like what your office is all about. It's about patient treatment, right. What's best for the patient. Yeah. It's taken it from endo to the final restoration.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, it has now been a few decades now, over a couple of decades,
Yeah.
25 years or so.
Yeah, since our first one was a cruise ship, it's been 25 years, exactly.
So Real World Endo's come a long way under your leadership, and then Dennis helping as well.
And what you've done with the website and all this stuff, and you're developing ideas and all the time, I think it really set a standard.
Yeah, and we look forward to be part of the future with the new innovation, all the new things that are coming, and we're so happy that you're still out there teaching and
Keeps me youthful.
Exactly, and that still have the energy to do the all-day lecture hands-on courses, so that's wonderful. So Annie, I know you live down Palm Beach Gardens, and you have a gorgeous house down there, but you have this little vacation house in the Cape Cod, and it's a historic one, so I'd love it if you can give us a quick tour at the end to see what you have.
Well, the interesting thing with this house, before we finish up here, the house was built in 1780, and for approximately 20 years, it was owned by a very famous actress, Shirley Booth. Those of you who are over 60 years old remember her from a TV show called Hazel. She played the maid, but what you probably don't realize that, but in 1952, she was the Academy Award winner for Best Actress for a movie called Come Back Little Sheba. Burt Lancaster was the male star, Shirley was the female star, and this was her house, and she lived here 11 months a year. And so when she moved on, the house then went into the hands of another individual who had the resources to really put some incredible things in the house. What's really amazing is that when I bought this house and going through the books and the china and the antiques, this stuff is real, and it goes back into the late 1700s, which there are some people who don't like that stuff, but since I'm getting to become a bit of an antique myself, I kind of appreciate antiques that are kept in good shape and restored. So my pleasure to have you guys here.
Terrific. Absolutely. So let's go take a quick look around, and thank you again for spending your morning here with us. Thank you. So Andy, tell us a little bit about your house. Looks beautiful, as all I can say from those people watching.
Yeah, this is a really special place. First of all, this house was built in 1780, and the first deed that I have is from 1826. But the previous owner had an enormous pewter collection, and I think I've got all the stuff here. All these cabinets have pewter. I have another cabinet inside, and you can see, even though these things are, most of these are from 1802, 1803 from London, in Great Britain, in the UK, not London, Ontario. You can't polish pewter too much, but I kind of got it to a nice collection. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to make this house look like a boat and incorporate and maintain the antiquity. A lot of younger people come in and knock down walls. This was the original end of the house. So the first house that was built, the 1780 house, it ended here. The original roof was right there. This, believe it or not, is the original glass. So this glass is a couple of 100 years old, and we've been able to maintain that, which is great. And over here, you can see what I've done on the countertops. I basically have made it like a teak with 7 coats of varnish. And so this kind of gives me the impression like I'm on a yacht or a boat, and I'm looking for that. And these old homes, this room was actually called the keeping room. So I actually have, I have 4 fireplaces, they all work. I have all the cooking utensils. In the keeping room, this is where they cooked, this is where they ate dinner, this is where they had casual conversation. What I've done here is I restored this old cabinet, and I've got it with Chinese antiques, pewter there, and some more stuff down here. And you can see when you pan back to the other side here, this table is a pine table. It's not chestnut. Pine is thinner. And this is circa 1750. This was original barn siding. And I had the table was a kind of a custom deal. But what I'm trying to do is that this house has documentation that the pine in the house came down by sailboat from Maine. And you know, if you're a pine tree in Florida or in Alabama, that's one thing, but everything grows. But if you're a pine tree in Maine, you're a pretty tough species to survive the winters. So that's the pine. Over here, we're now going into the parlor. All the floors in this house are the original floors. In the keeping room, I had them sanded, but this was the original 1780 pine. I oil it and wax it. There's going to be a carpet that is due in about 2 weeks, and I have a big leather chair that's still 5 months out before it gets delivered.
Are these nautical tools?
Well, this is my uncle, who was a captain in the Merchant Marine. This was his first sextant. And these are Chinese artifacts. The reason I have a lot of Chinese here, a lot of Nantucket Cape Cod homes had Chinese antiques because of the captains. Back in this room over here, there's a bathroom here to the right. I had a great electrician, and he's electrified all these original old pewter and candle things. These are, it's an Audubon. Then I have a picture of some whaling things. That's my Penn Award. Yeah, I'm very proud to have received that, the Evans Award. In 175 years of the school, they've only given it out 17 times, and I was fortunate enough to be an award winner a couple of years ago. I refinished all of this. I like refinishing stuff on boats, so this is kind of like a boat. So I restained everything, I varnished it. This is a very, very old lantern that my electrician friend electrified. That's really old. And then the original outside lantern on this house, that was like 150 years, something like that.
That's where we are, right at the elbow of the Cape.
Absolutely, 1000%. And this is Stage Harbor's over here, and this is right over here, right about there. So this is Cape Cod, this is Nantucket. That's about 23 miles south of Monomoy. All the white sharks are here. The Labrador Current comes down here. This is Gulf Stream. So what makes Chatham a great fishing place, you have quite warm water from the Gulf Stream meeting very cold water from the Labrador Current, and that's great fishing.
Ah, that's why.
That's why.
And the kind of fish you get, obviously, besides cod, which obviously is
striped bass, bluefish, albacore, and the tuna grounds out here are really fabulous. And the white sharks are from up here at Provincetown, Race Point, all the way down here. But the biggest congregation is right here off of Monomoy and Chatham.
That's pretty close to you right now.
Oh, yeah,
How many were you telling me the white sharks?
800 over a couple of years when they're keeping track. That's a lot. So up here, this is a little room I call the forecastle. Forecastle is the front of a boat. Kids like this room because of the gabled ceiling. Pretty cool. I have an enormous amount of closet space in this house, and that's an interesting thing. And then let me show you. This is really one of my favorite rooms for a couple of reasons. The original bathroom up here ended right here, and it went straight across. So when I had them take down the ceiling, it went up to the top of the roof. So what we did is we put in this bathroom, this shower. This shower's marble, and when you stand in the shower, you can look out right over the ocean. So it's really, really cool taking a shower and looking out over the ocean. So I wish it was a nice day. Unfortunately, it's kind of a icky, sticky day, but this is a great place to take a shower. Moving along, we have another guest room over here. And again, the guest rooms have their own fireplaces. I'm really not so interested in actively doing a fire up here. Downstairs is different. I love wood fireplaces. I know a lot of people are not fans of them, but I'm a huge fan of them. And one of the things I was speaking with Ollie about, I may knock down the wall and make it one big room and have the fireplace inside. That'd be very, very unique. But during COVID and having contractors, it was absolutely impossible getting contractors. This is just a basic office in here. I still have to do some things, but what's nice, in the winter I have a nice view right out over the ocean. And again, oodles and oodles of storage space, which as we get older, it seems to require more and more of a need. Obviously, I like fishing, and over here in this corner, I used to make a lot of fishing rods. And so all of these are rods that I made, and you can see by the fancy thread work, I would spend all winter, and then I would epoxy this. But these are wonderful rods still to fish with, so nice and light. Not really a fly fishing person. I really like light tackle, salt water, and other stuff in the salt water. So coming forward, watch your step. By the way, this is a very typical Nantucket Cape Cod color, is the blue floor paint with white speckles. This is very common in these older Cape Cod houses. This is of course where all the magic happens, right? And obviously I'm making a joke about that, but this is where I spend most of my time sleeping, is up here. And it's fine. I like the shutters. The plantation shutters are nice. And
feels like you're going, just walking in a boat and all the chambers and the woodwork in there.
As we come into this back hallway, this I wanted to replicate like a boat. So if you could get your camera and come in here, This beautiful finish, this is what we call in the marine trade a mirror finish. It's basically high quality teak with 8 coats of varnish. And it's beautiful. You can feel that, Al. You feel how smooth that is. And that's impervious. And so I made this back hallway here something that is really reminiscent of a boat. I had an uncle who was a merchant marine captain, and this was the first vessel that he was master of. And I thought, oh, the color matches is perfect. What a nice place to put it. So what I've done with the kitchen, originally the height of the kitchen was only 6 feet 1, 6 feet 2 inches. And before I shrunk, I was 6 feet tall. Then the mucopolysaccharides gave up and I shrunk. But what we did is we took the ceiling down and we went up to the original pine floorboards above this. We gained an extra 9.5 inches. And then with the shiplap, we lost like 2. So we gained about 7 inches total. Put new beams back in. I like the look. And again, this is only 6 coats of varnish, but it's a teak stain. So what I'll do this winter, after this first year with this, I'll just have them use a very fine grit sandpaper or bronze wool, lightly abrade it, and then put another coat or 2 of varnish on it. We have a pantry in here. I've got my microwave. I have of course, my wine refrigerator. I have to have the wine refrigerator. That's obligatory. And I have a stacked washer and dryer like a boat, which is really, really good. And that's more than enough, capability for me. And that sign there was from my parents. My parents had been married in 1940. Wow. And my home in Florida, I've got a lot of pictures of them. They had a wonderful time in the beaches and sailing. And I have the Viking appliances. I like the Viking appliances, and I like basically the stainless effect. So for me, this type of finish would be tough if you had a couple of kids or if you had pets. But principally, generally, the only person here is going to be me. Right. So if something happens, I'm going to blame it on somebody else. I put a kind of a niche or a notch into the wood over here when I was opening some oysters. So I have to have something underneath that because I don't want to damage this stuff. But this is my house. This works for me. And, this is principally 6 months a year here. Maybe eventually it might be a little bit longer than that. But for right now, this is the summer house. Yeah. And it works really, really well. If we ever get nice weather, I'm going to have a big party here because this is a great party house. 2 patios, got a nice setup here in terms of cooking. And that means we're good to go.
Well, it's a great place, home away from home, from Florida, and it's so great. And you know what? I've just realized that from doing Real World Endo and all of the innovation education, we should also maybe do a home restoration.
Yeah, I do. And I have pictures. This house, in the interior, this house used to be a dark, dark brown. It was really dark. It was actually, to be honest, very spooky. Because at nights, old New England houses, there's lots of things going on in them. But I'm very pleased how it came out. I love the color of the brick. Kind of the blue is basically kind of like the ocean here. And I'm very pleased the way this came out. And we'll definitely set up a party, have a couple of champagnes and some oysters, and that's the way to do it.
I'll probably come down and see you down in Florida one time as well. Again,
yes,
Annie, thank you so much for sharing that whole history and also letting us see your beautiful little home, antique, beautiful home.
You got it.
Thank you.
Maintain the antiquity.
For Real World Endo, I'm AANasseh, joined by Koch, and until next video, let's save some teeth.